So we've heard equalizing funding in public schools, as well as recruiting and expanding the pipeline for black male teachers.
Giving every student a fair and substantive opportunity to learn. And the research clearly indicates that if you give a child access to a highly effective teacher, early childhood education, college-bound curricula, and equitable instructional expenditures, there's about a 95 to 99% chance that they will meet proficiency levels, graduate. The challenge is, if you look at most states, and so the dollars are important, but we have to go beyond the dollars. If you look at most states, you have a district in a state where 95% of the teachers are certified. In the same state, 70% in another district. In the same state, you might find even lower. And more often than not, the places where the teachers are not certified or highly qualified are the places where black children are located. So our challenge becomes to institutionalize a resource accountability frame. We already have an outcomes frame. The No Child Left Behind Act concretized an outcomes frame. You want to achieve these high performance levels, annual yearly progress. But now we have to put accountability not just on the heads of teachers and children, but on the heads of legislators and governors to ensure that every child, regardless of where the child is born and whom the child is born to, can access a public school that gives the child access to a highly effective teacher, early childhood education, equitable instructional expenditures, and a college-bound curricula. Because that is the type of reform that's necessary. Now, I think the congressman is right. The federal government has some limitations as it relates to how they can become involved in education at the local level. 1973 in San Antonio versus Rodriguez, the question was asked, is education a federal right? The Supreme Court said no, we'll leave it up to the states. For 40 years since, there have been 45 state litigations to achieve some level of equity in education. But what the federal government can do is require a resource accountability standard in order to receive federal funds. For those states that have not achieved those particular goals, what's your plan to ensure that there's some level of equity in the state before you receive our funds? Much in the same way we have an outcomes standard put in place. Require that level of accountability from governors and legislators. Now, it is going to cost. But since Congress, and while Congress has its checkbook open, if we estimate that it's going to be between $30 and $50 billion, that's not too much to pay for. It's an investment. Every dollar spent in education is $4 returned. And it makes no sense for us to give AIG $85 billion when they can't ensure that every child will have access to early childhood education. Makes no sense to give $700 billion to financial institutions when they won't invest in and give the types of college loans necessary so that we can improve the achievement level. So if it seems like I'm drawing a line in the sand, this year when the reauthorization or next year of the No Child Left Behind Act or Elementary Secondary Education Act comes up, we cannot negotiate or compromise what it takes to make it happen. The Elementary Secondary Education Act has never been fully funded. It's been authorized, but never been appropriated. I would give you $10, but I'm going to give you $2. We need to ensure that at the level that it's authorized, it's actually appropriate. And I think the CBC members can play a very important role. If it means walking out, if it means staging some type of civil disobedience within the Democratic Party, within Congress, it's necessary. I remind you, yesterday was the anniversary of the desegregation of Little Rock, Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. And during that situation, there was a time when the mob was outside, the children were inside, and they were concerned on how will we get the kids out of here. And one of the police officers recommended, well, if we just give them one, maybe the mob will let the others out. Now, wisely, they disagreed. Somebody else disagreed. I feel like each time we compromise a dollar amount, when we know what it takes to actually ensure equity, we're just giving them one. And we can no longer compromise. This is not the year. If we recognize that they will write the check for $85 billion and $700 billion, they should definitely write the check for $50 billion.
Along those lines, a couple of colleagues and I were joking yesterday that maybe we should just start calling some of these programs like the Head Start Bank or the Elementary and Secondary Education Bank.
Absolutely.
Then maybe we can get a little bit more attention paid. I'll let you know how successful we are at that next year during the re-off. Dr. Harper, Dr. Tolson's research highlights non-core academic variables that contribute to success among African American males. He talked a lot about the importance of nutrition and well-being and happiness and safety. While acknowledging the importance of feeling positive about school, being engaged in extracurricular activities supported by these nurturing relationships, how do we balance the needs of the whole child with ensuring that our kids can read, write, and perform basic mathematical computation? Said another way, how do we ensure that black boys are academically prepared for the challenge of college and the workplace while ensuring that they're engaged in the learning process?
Sure, but I am going to respectfully request that the next time you ask me a question, that it not be right after you ask him a question. So let's see if I can do this.
I have every confidence.
Well, David, I think your question is a good one. I certainly think that engagement in educationally purposeful activities and experiences are important. And I would like to sort of accentuate, if I can, the educationally purposeful part of it. There is now decades of empirical research to confirm that students who are involved in things outside of school that equip them with a set of transferable outcomes, those outcomes also show up in the classroom. And that's true for both K-12 and higher ed. So insofar as we can get black boys into educationally purposeful activities after school that focus on college readiness, that focus on crafting productive and resistant responses to the stereotypes that they encounter in school and outside of school, that focus on their future selves and helping them to understand that if you want to be a congressman, this is what a congressman does. This is what a congressman looks like. If you want to be a doctor, let me introduce you to a couple doctors. Those sorts of things after school, again, sort of develop within the students a sense of future orientation and self-efficacy and so on that begin to improve academic outcomes. I would be remiss if I didn't also, really advocate for what I know to be an enormous predictor of black male transition to and success in college. And I was reminded of it when Congressman Davis was talking about his own parents who said, if you do this, you won't experience these barriers. If you do this, you could go on and be this thing instead of this other. In my National Black Male College Achievement Study, I interviewed these 219 college achievers, guys who were doing extraordinarily well both inside and outside the classroom on their campuses. They were student leaders, very engaged, arguably the best and brightest black male students at their universities. 8 of them were from Howard University. So when I asked these guys, and I should also mention that 58% of them came from low-income and working class families, and 80% of them came from families where neither of their parents went to college. So when I asked these guys, well, did you always know you were going to college? Without exception, they all said, yes, I always knew I was going to college. So when I said, I'm looking at your profile sheet and I see that neither of your parents went to college. So how did you know you were going? They said, in my house, it wasn't a question of if I was going to college. It was always where, if there was even any negotiation there. So the consistent articulation of parent expectations, if you do this, and I'm expecting you to do this, then this is the kind of life that you will have, suggests to me that funding parent education programs that reinforce the notion to parents of the importance of the consistent articulation of high expectations for college-going and educational success is a worthwhile endeavor, even if those parents hadn't attended college themselves, even if they don't know how to fill out the FAFSA or what a FAFSA is. You know, again, the consistency of high expectations, I think, is really important.
Thank you for that. Ivory, I'm going to ask Ivory one last question, just an overarching question, and then I'm going to open the floor to questions. There's a mic here. Let me be real clear about the rules. If you get up, please ask a question. I know some of us like to give statements and remarks. Please, I will cut you off. I love you, but I will cut you off. Please ask a question and make it succinct so that we can allow for as many as possible. Ivory, we've heard a lot about, I think a couple of people have alluded to the significance of this being Obama time. I want to talk, are you to talk more about how do we continue to have conversations about addressing the needs of black boys in what some people see as a post-racial moment in time, right? The idea that Obama is an example of how we've transcended the need to have these conversations. How do we continue to talk about this given that context?
I think as long as the disparities exist, we still have to talk about it. And, you know, we can have a black man as the president of the United States or a president of the world. If we still have these disparities, we still have to talk about it. But I do want to talk a little bit about what Obama's campaign might mean to these kinds of discussions. One thing that Barack Obama said that I think was very important is he said, I need your help to get elected, but I'm going to need your help even more once I get elected. And that's very important. Barack Obama is a man running for president, but as one person and as the president of the United States, he is still one person. In order for us to make any of these changes, it's going to take a massive effort on the part of us. We also have to think about the era that we're living in right now. Another thing that we've learned from Obama's campaign is the way that the fundraising worked revolutionized the way that we think about how to achieve different things. We saw people giving $50 and it amassed to more than what other people was getting through these small networks of $100,000, $1 million contributions. And so we think about the power of the numbers that we have. We also think about technology and what that means to us. We also have to understand, especially in the context of educating black boys, we are in a post-industrial information age, which is very, very important. How many of y'all have PDAs in your pocket right now? Okay, so we are in the era where all the ones that raise their hands right now, which was more than 50%, can pull up Danny Davis's bill, the Second Chances Act, read about that bill, and before the end of this session, you can ask him intelligent, informed questions about that bill. No other time in history have we had these types of abilities. But even though we have these abilities create a new opportunity to oppress African Americans if we don't have the same technological capacities, especially in our schools, as other people. So we have to think about that. We also have to help people understand the powers that they have. Information is very, very important. And the fact that we have information so readily available right now, all of us can potentially be experts in anything and everything. Jobs aren't as compartmentalized as they once were. So it doesn't take a specific skill for any job. It takes this fund of knowledge. And so we have to start preparing young black males to enter that type of arena.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Yes, sir. I know you got the first question. Please direct it to one of the panelists and not all of them, if possible.
I don't know if it's on.
I think it's on.
Okay. Reggie Felton, National School Boards Association. Appreciate, sir, your commitment on the committee and the recognition about the 10% of federal contribution. In your view, what's a realistic expectation for us from the 111th Congress as it relates to not only funding for education, but a shift that would in fact be more meaningful and have impact on improving the lot of African American males?
Well, let me just tell you, I believe that our country economically is in the worst shape that most of us have ever experienced. That you'd have to be older than I am to have experienced any time when we were in worse shape. And I think so because of globalization as a big part of it. I also think when you talk internationally and you talk overarching about our country, we have lived consistently better than any large group of people in the world. We do live better than any massive number of people in the world. Part of the reason that we have been able to do so, though, has been because of our ability to exploit other nations. We don't like to acknowledge that. We don't like to accept that. But the reality is that other nations have, in some instances, caught up to us, surpassed us, and we don't have the ability to exploit them the same way that we used to. They are now exploiting us. We are borrowing money from China to buy oil from Saudi Arabia. Americans don't like to think that way. I think that we're going to have to struggle just as hard to maintain the quality of life to which we have become accustomed, as generally we struggle with the idea that we're moving up with. You know, we've really thought every year is going to be better. I'm going to make more money next year than I made this year. I'm going to have more goods and resources and more opportunities and more latitude next year than I had this year. Well, I'm not sure that that's about to happen. I'm just not convinced that that's about to happen. So I don't think that we can look to the federal government. How can we? I mean, if we do a $700 billion bailout, which might become more than $1 trillion, where's the money going to come from? I mean, money only comes from us. And if you've got a government that gives the wealthiest people in the nation tax breaks, telling them that they don't have to spend as much money or pay as much money, and you got other people talking about they're going to cut taxes. Well, let me tell you, government gets its money from taxes. That's where government gets its money. And you've got a lot of people talking every day about not paying taxes because people are pretty much like those that Frederick Douglass talked about. They want progress, but they want want it without the thunder and the lightning. I mean, Oliver Wendell Holmes said that the price that you pay for a civilized society is taxes. Now, if you can get it without paying taxes, I mean, I'd like to know how you get it, just as, for example, yeah, if black boys could interact with more black males on a regular basis, but guess what? People ain't getting married. So who are the males they're going to interact with in their houses? They ain't getting married. The marriage rates are going down. Almost half the kids in my congressional district, black, live with somebody other than their natural parents. 34% of them. And we're better off than a whole lot of other people throughout America. So it's tough. I don't expect any real increases.
The term that I hear a lot on the Hill is be cautiously optimistic. Yes, sir.
Good morning. My name is Jacob Adams. I have a question regarding regarding policy around charter schools versus public schools versus vouchers. There are a number of success models in this country around identifying what are the success factors. We talked about parents, we talked about quality teachers. We talked about participation in rigorous curriculum, academic peer interaction, and child's own perception. We see more charter schools in the District of Columbia taking students from the public school, and also the Congress wants to extend the voucher. I'm wondering, from a policy standpoint, are the charter schools versus public schools, are those models showing more success than the public schools, as we're talking about primarily the African male student in the inner city? And are there successes that can be replicated either in the public schools or the charter school as a result of those research where you have shown charter schools are successes from those successes in the African male student?
Okay. Dr. Jackson, you want to take first crack at that one?
You obviously have to define success. And often when we talk about charter schools, vouchers, public school system, these conversations bring a lot of noise to the discussion, because the conversation is really about how do we get all children access to resources. So if it's about, we can look at some of the charter schools and some of the single-sex academies, and there have been some positive results. But when you look at even the Eagle Academy in New York City, which has about 200 students, there are over 1 million students in the New York public schools. So that's not a solution to address the other 95%. If you think about vouchers, if we are truly trying to find a solution to address the needs of all of our children, the voucher solution, it doesn't work. The voucher recommendation doesn't work because there are not enough private academies that will, number one, accept the students, and number two, even have the capacity to house them. So again, we're left with this discussion of how do we get the resources to the students who are in the public school systems across the country. In Illinois, I spoke about this point of opportunity to learn. Looking at who has access to these 4 core resources we talked about. In Illinois, African American children have 29% of the opportunity to learn as white children. 29% probability to access those 4 core resources. So we're still left with this discussion about our public schools. How then do we put in place a resource frame in order to provide the dollars? And I agree with the congressman that these are tough times. But tough times require tough choices and tough investments. We have an $11.3 trillion deficit right now. Adding $50 billion to that seems like a good investment. A good investment if it's going to mean that we are producing another generation that has an opportunity to learn. And there has been a great deal of international exploitation, but I think part of what the U.S. is dealing with is some internal domestic exploitation. Exploitation of groups of people who, with the changing demographics, you can't afford to have 50% of a population drop out. You can't afford to have such a large percentage no longer unemployed, because it will impact, as it is, the overall economy. So I hope that, I think charter schools play a role in providing innovative strategies, but ultimately we've got to be able to scale those up to impact the majority of students who are still in public schools.
I've got to run and vote. Let me just say this about charter schools, and I agree that they play a role. I also agree that individual parents, because everybody comes from a self-interest vantage point, will want to put their children in a charter school. Charter schools and small schools are strategies being employed by boards of education and superintendents and people to keep people thinking that something is really being done, when massively the only way that you're going to get education seriously in low-income communities is that low-income parents and people in those communities decide that education is absolutely important. And they're going to have to make things happen Another Dr. Shepard did that. Dr. Shepard down at the Banneker School District in St. Louis, Missouri, some years ago, where he really just went out and organized the community, went to the joints, went to the clubs, went to the pool rooms, went to the churches, challenged the teachers, challenged the teachers union, challenged everybody. And it was the worst performing district in St. Louis at the time, the Banneker School District. And he raised the achievement levels significantly as a result of that process. He became known as the Pied Piper of education. We got to have some Pied Pipers.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Fenwick, I know you wanted to talk to that question as well.
I'd be mindful, too, of the history of vouchers. Vouchers were a white response to the desegregation of public schools, and so that history, I think, still speaks to the challenge or the tension between the white taxpayer hand and the fact that public schools across this country are nearly 40% African American and Hispanic. And the intent to redistribute wealth, redistribute tax dollars to go away from students, away from black and brown students. I think that's a real reality. Part of the equations that we're seeing around charters, around vouchers, around privatization are an explicit effort to refunnel tax dollars and resources away from the neediest students, and we have to kind of explicitly acknowledge that. I think nationally the data on charter schools is still sketchy. Too often in our communities, black children leave underperforming regular public schools to enter underperforming, ill-resourced charter schools, and parents are left at the dead end of choices. And the overarching methodology to correcting this is looking at these funding formulas that states use to provide resources to school districts within the state. We need an equity index, as my colleague to my left says, that puts the onus and the burden of accountability on legislators, on superintendents, on the adults, not the children, and certainly not the teachers.
We've got 3 more questions. If you guys can keep them under a minute, we can do this on time.
Good morning. My name is Eric Thomas. Earlier, I think it was Brother Tosin, right? You presented a graph that showed the happiness level of girls in school and how well they did versus the happiness level of males, which basically said that girls are able to perform better even though they are unhappy, and males overwhelmingly cannot. So my question is, what are we doing? Are we underestimating the psychological state of some of these black males? In my experience with some of the males in D.C., they're almost basically suicidal in a slow way. You know, they don't care if they get killed or not. And what are we doing to address their psychological needs?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and I think that's an important observation. I've done other writing on how we look at problems in general among black males, and I just recently wrote a book chapter for a proposal where, and this was looking at black men in the criminal justice system, and I talked about in that book chapter how post-traumatic stress disorder is largely undiagnosed among black males, even though black males are the most likely to be a victim of a violent crime. There's a perception that black men are inoculated to the harmful psychological effects of trauma because there's this perception that we're out there, you know, we're the aggressor. So if we get victimized, you know, it just doesn't hurt us as much. Whereas if a white female is a victim of a violent crime, post-traumatic stress disorder is almost a default disorder. But when you really look at the diagnostic criteria, a lot of these black men do fit in that category of post-traumatic stress disorder, the ones that are in areas with high levels of violence. And with the children, we see depression and anxiety and all of these types of things, but we don't have the lens for it because of the perceptions that we see on television. So it's going to take a lot of educating. It's going to take a lot of trainings to these teachers and the counselors and the parents and everybody who has been somehow affected by some of the images that we see on television and the stereotypes, the basic stereotypes that black men don't hurt. And a lot of black men have to get past that stereotype because there are kids in these schools, black males in these schools, who are suffering inside, but they feel like they can't show it. And so we have problems that are just playing off of each other. So there's no easy solution to that, but it's a very important problem that we need to observe and rectify.
Good morning. My name is Will Parker, Regional Outreach Director for the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. I'd like to direct my question to Dr. Fenwick if possible. Currently in my work, I work with state legislators to hope to define what highly qualified looks like. But on a daily basis, I'm finding that the states are minimizing what happens in the colleges of education, specifically in teacher programs. And what is happening is that we're finding that the lowest performing teachers are in the places that we're talking about today. How do we ensure, and most of all, ensure that the teacher education programs remain rigorous? And we're allowing boards of education to minimize what we're doing and create practitioners that are harming our children versus helping our children. And the other piece of that is that when we take a look at where we're going with this, how do we sustain that? We know we want to bring individuals in through alternative programs, but how do we create high and rigorous teacher education programs that promote social capital for these individuals and opportunities for teachers to know what their race is and how they talk about that race? Not one primary versus the other, kind of very similar to the conversations around race, critical conversations. How do we make that happen?
Thought my questions were multifaceted.
Yeah, I know. Wonderful question, just about also how we assess teacher effectiveness. I'll say something about that in just a second. I agree with the sentiment of your question. I don't believe we can microwave a teacher. I'm a former urban school teacher. I think it takes preparation. I'm very disturbed by districts and state moves to microwave teachers, to say any and all comers, please come and stand in front of children. And too often, those microwave teachers who 2 years later get student loan relief and can add that to their resume, almost like a missionary, come to urban districts with a missionary zeal, maybe well-intended, leave those children unaffected positively academically. It's a problem. There certainly should be alternative routes to teaching. Those should be rigorous and well-controlled, and I think that training should occur in schools of education. We don't need less of a knowledge base to teach the children. We need more. One of the things that we're doing, one conversation that my faculty is having is about looking at multidisciplinary knowledge bases and how they can add to teacher preparation. For instance, there's a knowledge base around family and child intervention that is best taught in the School of Social Work. There's a knowledge base around community that may be best taught in the School of Divinity, and a knowledge base around pediatric brain development that could be best taught by School of Nursing faculty. But how do we create teacher preparation programs that address the needs of urban students? How my grandmother taught or my mother may have taught is very different than how I might teach in these in current schools. I think that schools of education are picking up the mantle to have these conversations, but the conversations that are occurring in schools of education have not kept pace with legislative zeal to change teacher certification standards so that any and everyone can stand at the door of the classroom.
Perfect.
I don't know if I got to all the components of your question, though.
Sir, last question.
Good morning. My name is Exodi Road, and it's great to be here from the great state of California. All right. I wanted to know, Dr. Tolson, in your research, when you looked at African American achievement, did you also find that students from, let's say, like the Caribbean and more recent African immigrants, did you find that those students tend to do better? And I asked that question with the context I graduated from Dillard University in 2006 in New Orleans, and what I found is like the students who are from the Caribbean or different African countries, recent African immigrant children, they did a lot better than us natives, us African American natives. So does your research look into that, or do you have an answer for that?
I tried, but I didn't have enough. I didn't have enough from the Caribbean and Africa. But I did. That is a variable that I thought about testing. Yeah.
That's one of the things in our research that we looked at specifically in New York, and we found just that the immigrant students were performing, black male students were performing better than the African American students in a number of areas. So that's why, our focus, to Dr. Fenwick's point, is, we have $1 million grant where we're focusing on getting more black male teachers into the classroom. We're doing grant making there, $12 million over the next 5 years to identify those programs and policies that are effective in addressing the outcomes for black males. It's a part of the Winning Strategies Initiative. And over the next 5 years, a $60 million grant program to fund public organizing around these opportunity to learn frames. So we want, I just want to underscore what Congressman said, this is not going to happen unless we organize. We want to blame the federal government, we want to blame Bush, but the answer is right in our own communities. And at the Schott Foundation, that's what we fund, that level of organizing. The Civil Rights Act did not happen because Democrats or Republicans wanted to do it. It happened because in 1963, hundreds and thousands of people marched on Washington and began a movement. We need a movement today in education. Next week, the Schott Foundation will host our Opportunity to Learn Summit. We're looking for students, researchers, Howard students, to come to the opening reception on October the 2nd at 6:30, because we have to do some grant making around organizing and build a movement to bring about the change that we desire.
In closing, beginning with Dr. Harper, then working back towards me, can you guys offer to the audience the one thing that we should all do so that when we come back next year, this conversation is very different?
I would sort of jump on the bandwagon here and say that the organizing phenomenon seems most compelling to me. Is not one with which I entered this room thinking that's what we ought to do, but I am now convinced, based on the models that and the examples that have been cited, that that's something we should do. So, really getting together in a grassroots sort of way and organizing around and creating a campaign, if you will, for black male educational achievement is the way to go.
Thank you. Dr. Jackson?
I would just encourage you to identify at the level at which you want to make the impact. We are not going to make the impact at the national level, some at the state, some at the local. For some, the impact is right in your home. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, graduated with a 2.25 on a 5-point scale, got my doctorate from Harvard, my law degree from Illinois, undergraduate degree from Xavier. And I say all that to say that there are thousands of brothers out there who have the opportunity it's not being shown right now. And we've got to labor so that they can give birth to that opportunity. And it takes, again, organizing, supporting our institutions, because when I left Chicago, Harvard didn't have the professors who were smart enough to teach me. So I had to go to Xavier University, who had those professors who could educate the student, as so many of our HBCUs, with the 2.25 and the 4.0. So we've got to find a way to get back to our core institutions and begin a movement, not for some, but for all.
Thank you. Dr. Fenwick?
I would say two things. One, if each person in this room sent me 2 African American males, I can graduate them as teachers. So send 2. Send 2 directly to me. We'll fund them. We want them, if you will scour your communities, your churches, send 2 to Howard University School of Education. And we will graduate them as teachers who can go back and serve their communities in knowledgeable ways.
Thank you. Dr. Tolson?
I was actually going to say what Dr. Jackson said. I think everyone should ask themselves, what am I able and willing to contribute, no matter how small, even if it's to do one thing on one day. If everybody did that, if everybody in the black community did that, then we would have over 30 million things happening. or 30 million small things happening, but 30 million things happening. So we all have to just ask ourselves that question: whether am I willing and able to contribute to solve this problem?
Thank you. In closing, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Annie E. Casey and Senior Associate Bonnie Howard, the National Education Association, and Cynthia Swan. I'd also like to thank the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, the esteemed members of our panel, and most of all, you for helping to make this a success. Thank you and have a wonderful day.